For Christians, there is no holier time than Easter, the day that celebrates the resurrection of Jesus Christ. To prepare for this blessed occasion, the faithful observe a period leading up to Easter, known as Lent. Like other religious observances, there are many traditions that help give this solemn time both meaning and purpose. Welcome. I'm your host, Carolyn Morrison. Join me as we look into the history and significance of Lent on this episode of Mysteries of the Church. In the Christian tradition, Lent is the 40 days leading up to Easter, not counting Sundays. The word Lent is derived from the ancient English term Lengton, which means springtime. So right away there is a natural connection between the resurrection of Christ and the new life that comes with spring.
Lent is a season of 40 days in which we prepare in sorrowful reparation for the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Lent has deep roots in the church. It goes back actually to apostolic times, but in those days, very early on, the first 3 centuries, Christians prepared for Easter for 3 days. Then Rome extended it to a week from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday. And then around the 4th century, it began to be 40 days.
Lent is a time to kind of reflect on how we've been living our lives and sort of shape up for the celebration of the Easter Vigil and the Easter season, and for the celebration of our common identity. And it's the Christian life that's supposed to be marked with prayer, penance, and almsgiving.
Most importantly, it's a time when Christians prepare themselves for the most celebrated day in the liturgical calendar. They do this by engaging what's regarded as the 3 pillars of Lent: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving.
When we celebrate the season of Lent, there are 3 primary actions that one may take to prepare oneself for the celebration of Easter. And those 3 pillars, if you will, are prayer, fasting, and almsgiving.
Even those things are in the Hebrew Scriptures. Prayer is the attempt to reach God with what we have to say in our hearts, to be united with God, to be express, for one thing, atonement, sadness, expiation for our sins. Fasting is also an ancient practice, partly a penitential practice, and partly a practice to prepare oneself for celebration. And then almsgiving fits right in with what Christ has said, especially at the Last Supper: you got to be concerned about others. So unless you are giving, you're not really following Christ.
There are a number of significant days that are observed throughout Lent, 2 of which are symbolically linked from year to year: Ash Wednesday and Palm Sunday. Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of Lent and gets its name from the ashes of burned palm leaves used during services. The palms are from the previous year's Palm Sunday observance, which is the beginning of Holy Week, the last week of Lent.
Holy Week is the most important week in the liturgical calendar because it begins for us on Palm Sunday, when Christ made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem.
It's like a ticker tape parade in New York City after the Yankees win the baseball season or some other big historic event here. It's kind of that Middle Eastern equivalent of that, greeting the royalty.
Ironic as a triumphal entry because it meant he was going to his death ultimately.
Holy Thursday, which commemorates the Last Supper, is the start of Easter Triduum, the last 3 days before Easter, which includes Good Friday and Holy Saturday.
Holy Thursday is one of the most interesting liturgies that we have in the Church's year. We commemorate on Holy Thursday the institution of the Eucharist. We commemorate on that day the fact that Jesus Christ, before he died, gave his body and blood to his disciples as a perpetual remembrance. We celebrate also on that day the institution of the sacred priesthood. Jesus Christ commissions at the Last Supper his apostles to be the first priests. We also celebrate the gift of service and ministry on that wonderful, wonderful day, Holy Thursday. We do this in so many different ways within the context, of course, of the readings, which we recognize the commemoration of all three events, service, Eucharist, and priesthood, but in the context of the liturgy itself.
Well, on Holy Thursday, the Church keeps memory of several different things. One is the night before Jesus died. And it sort of takes its focus from the story that's only in John's Gospel, and that is the washing of the feet. So besides remembering that night and the texts that are used, they use the reading, the Pauline reading that recounts the Last Supper.
Good Friday is the most solemn day on the Christian calendar. It's a day of remembrance and reflection on the death of Jesus.
Good Friday is a unique liturgy. It's composed of three parts. There's the liturgy of the Word, which always includes the Passion narrative. There is the liturgy of prayers for the whole world that cover everybody and everything. And then there is the adoration of the cross, and followed by communion, and that's the end. It's stark. There can never be flowers, for example, no adornments. The Eucharist is not preserved in the tabernacle. Usually it's left open. There is not to be even any worship of the Blessed Sacrament on Good Friday.
The liturgies of Holy Week are meant to be grand. They're meant to be dramatic. They're meant to be the most solemn of all of our Church's liturgies. And so the preparation alone has to be perfect. The celebrant of the Mass must go over every single aspect of the Mass with those who are going to be assisting in ministry, with the concelebrating priests, if they are any, with the parish deacons, if they are any, with those who will be the liturgical lectors, the readers, those who will be the altar servers, the sacristans of the parish, the choir. Everyone has to be on the same page for these liturgies. If there's ever a time to have the liturgical celebration in the parish be absolutely uniform and perfect, it is during Holy Week. They are very complex liturgies, but they are very beautiful liturgies. And they are liturgies that will bring the people of God very close to the Lord in this most sacred and solemn time.
When we return, we look into the meaning of self-sacrifice during Lent, including the long-held tradition of fasting and the giving up of meat on Fridays. Mysteries of the Church will be right back. Welcome back to Mysteries of the Church. The abstinence of eating meat on Fridays is a Catholic tradition dating back to the Middle Ages. But today, this practice is mostly reserved for the Fridays during Lent, as well as Ash Wednesday, and is obligatory for all Catholics 14 years or older.
Abstinence applies to all those who are from the ages of 14 until the day that that Catholic Christian dies. We always must remain abstinent on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday and all of the Fridays of the holy season of Lent. Abstinence means no meat. We cannot eat anything with meat in it.
Well, meat is kind of the most important staple in the Western diet. Now, because we do have a lot of vegetarians these days and so forth, but that's because we've learned different things about nutrition. But historically, meat was considered to be one of the most important things you could have.
But never before in Western society has there been such an abundance and variety of food as we enjoy today, which makes the abstinence of meat feel less of a sacrifice than it once did. Therefore, it has become custom to also give up an indulgence, such as sweets or alcohol.
One can substitute anything that one would like in addition to not eating meat on days of abstinence, and of course on the days Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, which are days of fasting and abstinence. In Lent, one should try to find something that's been in the way, if you will. So perhaps it's smoking, perhaps it's drinking alcohol, perhaps it's drinking coffee or soda. It might be giving up something in order to put the focus more in on others.
The earliest record of a fast leading up to Easter dates back to the 5th century. The origins of the 40-day fast are believed to have biblical roots, most notably in the Gospel of Matthew, where it's written that Jesus fasted in the desert for 40 days before he began his ministry.
Well, Christians from the very early days had taken part in fasting. It's, again, following from the Hebrew tradition. We can look throughout the Old Testament and see examples of those who are fasting. Fasting due to prayer, due to penance, and Christians took that and applied it to the Christian lifestyle.
I think it's good to be reminded of what we're hungering for. And I don't know any way of doing that except by being hungry.
In addition to fasting and abstinence, Lent is a time when Christians are reminded about the virtue of charity and are encouraged to volunteer or give a donation to a cause. Together, these acts of self-sacrifice are meant as a reflection on the sacrifice Jesus made for us when he died on the cross.
That should be a mark of the Christian life. That is what we should do because we love one another and we're here to serve one another and to see who's in need. It's not something that only the confirmation class should do so that they can, show that, they check that box and they could be confirmed. I wouldn't pose anything on the 7th graders that the other people in the parish aren't doing. So if the parish is, taking care, is visiting the sick and doing the elders, I'd invite the 7th graders, to join that. So I think that these are things that should mark the parish life or the Christian life in general, that we serve one another.
Well, the question is a specious one because you are supposed to do it throughout the year. But the reason why Lent is the time you are especially called to it is to remind you of it and to make it a point that this is a time of preparation. When a young lady is about to be married, she does all kinds of things to make herself prepared. She wants to lose weight so that she fits her wedding gown and looks great. In other words, we all do this. Athletes do it. It's preparation for things. For the Christian, Lent becomes a time of understanding more clearly what we should be doing with all our lives. Now, you don't live as a Christian only in Lent. But Lent, again, becomes for us a dramatic way of relearning, re-emphasizing, re-experiencing what it means to be committed to Jesus Christ in our baptismal vows.
When Mysteries of the Church returns, we explain the symbols and colors of Lent, and later on, how these solemn days end in the joyous celebration of Easter. We'll be right back. Every year on Ash Wednesday, millions of Catholics around the world attend a service where the ashes from palms are applied to our foreheads in the sign of the cross. Although this may look unusual to the outsider, there is real meaning behind this ritual, which serves as a reminder of our mortality and our need for atonement.
As we look and we go through our church history, we can see that, for instance, in the Gallican liturgy of the 12th and 13th century, we begin to see the process of an Ash Wednesday begin almost for the first time.
They are burned because they are the sign of triumph, but the triumph of Christ came after his death and resurrection, so that the palms, which represented the anticipation of the coming of the Messiah, the coming of the King, the establishment of the kingdom, it wasn't to be on Palm Sunday. So destroying the palms is, in a sense, reducing them to remind us of our mortality and of our total dependence on God. That's where the ashes come from.
The symbolic use of color in the form of church decorations and vestments is customary throughout the year and changes in accordance to the liturgical calendar. During Lent, variations of the color purple are used to represent penitence and the suffering that Jesus endured during his persecution. Upon Easter sunrise, white and gold is used in celebration of the resurrection.
Well, each of the seasons has its own symbolic color. So white is generally our color for celebration. Green is the color that's used during the ordinal Sundays or ordinary time. Red on feasts of martyrs and also Good Friday, and a sign of the Spirit as well. Purple is used during Advent and Lent.
When considering all the practices, symbols, and traditions of Lent, it's important to remember that they all have a common purpose: to prepare us for the celebration of the resurrection. When we come back, why Easter is the most joyous day of the year for Christians. The culmination of Lent ends with Easter, a festive occasion filled with feasts, parades, and Easter egg hunts. But behind the celebratory nature of the holiday lies the very foundation of the Christian faith, the belief that Jesus had died and was resurrected so that mankind could be saved.
As far as we Christians are concerned, the greatest celebration in our church's calendar, the most important day in the church's calendar, is Easter. Easter is the day in which we celebrate that central fact of our faith, the Lord's resurrection from the dead. And on Easter, we gather together as a community of faith to celebrate our rebirth into Christ Jesus by receiving his body, by receiving his blood in Holy Communion.
Easter is a movable holiday, with the date changing from year to year. Using the vernal equinox as a starting point, Easter falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon of spring. Dating Easter in this manner has biblical roots, as the death and resurrection of Jesus is said to have occurred during the Jewish celebration of Passover. Although there are variations between the Western and Hebrew calendars, Passover is dated in a similar way, which is why the two holidays often coincide.
When we look throughout church history, we begin to see that at various times and in various places, Lent doesn't always seem to be those 6 weeks like we have now, those 40 days or so that we have now in our liturgical calendar. In some places, Lent had been longer. In some places, Lent had been shorter, up to including only about 3 or 4 days. However, we need to understand that the process of Lent as we have now, as a liturgical season, comes from the notion of a new springtime in our lives. We try to coincide it with the spring and that ending of the frost, and the beginning of new birth. And so we tie that in. So it's so many different reasons why various people throughout the world, throughout time, until the church definitively established the season of Lent, had different times and had different lengths for Lent.
It became official, well, first of all, in Rome, when they made it a week, which goes back to the end of the 3rd century. And then by the 4th century, it was observed almost everywhere. 40 days, beginning from Ash Wednesday to Easter, is actually 46 days, but they never count Sundays. And that's because the church always recognizes Sunday as the day of resurrection, as the Lord's Day.
Easter is the one most important feast that we celebrate. That's it. That's the point. Because that's the bottom line of the Christian belief system, is Jesus rose. If he only died, then forget it. We're out of here. The point is, he rose. And that's what the celebration is Easter is about. That, you know, our hope was not in vain. It was for real. Yes, he's the Messiah. He's the one.
We are all familiar with the images and traditions of Easter, such as the Easter Bunny and baskets filled with chocolate and marshmallow peeps. And although no one really knows the origins of these customs, they certainly reflect the celebratory mood of the day. In contrast, the weeks leading up to Easter are a solemn time. Through the traditions and practices of Lent, we become mindful about the sacrifice Jesus made on our behalf and are reminded on what it means to be Christian. Thank you for watching. I'm Carolyn Morrison, and I hope to see you next time on Mysteries of the Church.